I had a recruiter that said, listen, dude, do 4 years, don't do 6, because the money's going to catch up to you. The bonus isn't really a bonus. At that time, it actually was not a bonus. It'll catch up to you by the time you make E4. Like you'll be good. Do 4 years, you can always re-up, but you can't get out early.
Welcome to the 7 Eagle Group podcast, your home for inspiring stories, valuable tips, and great advice from hard-charging veterans so you can lead a more rewarding and lucrative post-military career.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Transition Tuesday. I'm your host, Brandon Gresham. We are here with Air Force veteran, podcaster, and entrepreneur, Carey Kight. I'll let Carey go ahead and introduce himself before we jump right in. Carey, it's really good to see you, man.
Hey, man, it's great to see you. It is great to be with you. I'm excited. I'm excited to chat. As Brandon said, my name is Carey Kight. I am an Air Force veteran. I served right out of high school from 2006 to 2010. I was in Texas for about a year, and I was in England for 3 years. I was a flight line guy. I loaded bombs on fighter jets. So I worked on the F-15E model at RAF Lakenheath in the UK. Premier 494th Premier Fighter Squadron in USAF, U.S. Air Forces in Europe. So I was privileged and fortunate to deploy to Afghanistan twice, as well as do some NATO operations, kind of some training and different things all around Europe with allied air forces and working with the EU. And got out, went to film school, and got started Scooby-Dooing my way into my industry.
Awesome, man. I like the Scooby-Doo reference. Perfect. Yeah. So tell us about your transition out after you got done serving. What was that like, and how did you kind of get where you're at right now?
It's a great question. I mean, it is the thesis of my podcast. My podcast is called Veteran Made, where I interview other service members who have transitioned into creative or entrepreneurial fields. Going into the military, transitioning in, I knew I did not want to be in as a career. So I went in, 4 or 6 years. I was very lucky. I had a recruiter that said, listen, dude, do 4 years, don't do 6, because the money's going to catch up to you. The bonus isn't really a bonus. At that time, it actually was not a bonus.
Gotcha.
And so it'll catch up to you by the time you make, E4. Like you'll be good. Do 4 years, you can always re-up, but you can't get out early. I'm like, all right, that's really smart. So I went into the military knowing that I wanted to get into a creative field. I was a screenwriting major in college when I got out, and I really knew that I wanted to tell stories through film and television, online, new media, whatever that might be.
Awesome.
So transitioning in, I was smart enough to plan knowing that I was going to get some kind of interdependence from my family, some financial independence, get some experiences, get some things that I could write and tell stories about. The one thing I wasn't really prepared for, though, getting out of the military was what was that plan? Like what were the tactical steps that I was going to take to implement that, to achieve that goal, right? And I was, when I first got out of the military, very stuck on the idea of goals. And I've since relied on systems and built systems to work towards outcomes rather than thinking about goals as milestones. And so I started the podcast to kind of retroactively figure out what it was that I did to become successful in the industry that I'm now currently successful in. I've by no means, made it, but I have seen success, and I'm making a living wage, and I'm building a business, and I'm building opportunities for myself. So that initial transition, to directly answer your question, was difficult. I got out, I went back home to Columbus, Ohio. I went to Ohio State, of which my family went, and I'm a fan of the football team, and it was super exciting to be there. For those that are college football fans, my freshman year was Urban Meyer's first year there. So the beginning of a great run as a fan of the Buckeyes. But ultimately the program there did not offer me what I needed, which was practical skills to build a career making films, which is what I wanted to do. It was more of a cinema studies program, very much gearing you up to be, like a film critic, which is valuable in its own right, but not what I wanted to do. And so I kind of had to figure out, all right, how do I pivot? What do I do? So I found a university down in Orlando, Florida called Full Sail University, which the long and the short of it is it's like Phoenix or DeVry for the arts. So you get a degree, you get that piece of paper that employers might want, but you really get practical skills at a trade-like institution that really gives you the opportunity to go pursue whatever it is you want to pursue in the arts. So I chose creative writing, and I was able to develop a skill set in video game writing, short story writing, script writing, screenwriting. I learned all of the genres. I took
Wow.
courses in horror and thriller and action and suspense and comedy and drama and sci-fi and all of these different things. And so it was a very immersive program that got very granular and very specific. And I came out of that program with, some published short stories. I came out of it with
Awesome.
2 short screenplays ready to produce. And, I went to LA right after that and got to work.
Man, look at you. Busy. That's a lot, man. Good for you.
Yeah.
So let's kind of quantify again, like what is some of the vets you've had on, and then the key points to some of the success that you've had and the opportunity talking to them, and then some of the failures as well.
You mean some of my failures or some of the just like
So it can be some of your failures if there's something you feel comfortable talking about. But in the process of going through what you've done with Veteran Made, you have talked to a lot of veterans. And kind of one of the things that I listen to you talk about is how there's not one roadmap for everybody, but the experience, and you're talking about developing those experiences, is what's so important.
Yeah.
And I'm sure through the conversations that you've had with these guys and these gals that you've listened to them talk about what has made them successful. And I'm sure there is some themes there inside of those conversations that you can kind of turn into key points, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for clarifying. Sorry about that. So yeah, there's 2 main through lines that have developed as I've hosted this podcast. I'm on episode, I think 64 just went live. I've got I think 70 in the chamber.
Amazing.
And finishing out the rest of this year, gonna get close to I'll hit 100 Q1 of next year, which is super exciting. The 2 things that have emerged coming out of it, one is relationships, and then the other is work. And I know both of those are very general and generic, so I'll dive deep on as I can on both of them right now. First thing, relationships. We are obsessed with building a network, right? We use LinkedIn, which is a great platform, but we use it as an opportunity to build a network of connections that we can reach out to if we need something. Every successful veteran that I have interviewed that has gone on to be a creative entrepreneur has built real relationships with real humans at a heart level and at a mind level. It is a mind to mind and heart to heart exercise. When we build relationships with other human beings, that is a reciprocal trade. What can I do for you and what you can do for me? It's not transactional, it's reciprocal. So it's not about building a network of people that can connect you to other people that can get you what you want. It is about building robust relationships with other humans that you can serve and that can serve you. And that's a big thing that's kind of emerged on the podcast. And I'm kind of trying it out as a tagline. It's like serve and be served, right? We all served in the military. One thing that we don't allow ourselves is the opportunity to be served by others. A lot of times we had supervisors, in the senior enlisted ranks or in the officer ranks that, it was very transactional. It was very network driven. It was very hierarchical. And what you realize at the team level, like you and a squadron of other cops and me working, in a squadron with other maintainers and on a crew of 3 loaders, like it's reciprocal, man. Like I can't, if the only way that bird is going to launch and drop the bombs that I loaded is if I set the crew chief up for success and she sets the avionics troop up for success and the engines troop is able to come in and work. When I was deployed, like we were trying to figure out how do we get these birds in the air and what order of operations do we need to engage in at our level. We weren't relying on the pro super, or the maintenance officer sitting in the talk to figure out, what it is that we need to do. We were out there making the decisions amongst ourselves. The same is true when we transition out, right? So build relationships with other people at the level that you're at so that you can serve each other as you move through the careers that you're building, kind of for yourselves. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. I think in a lot of ways, you're kind of talking about the human condition overall. That's how we've gotten this far as a species. Is not just transactional, what you can do for me. It's the reciprocal, like you said. You're taking care of each other, and that's how you build those relationships and trust, and then you learn from each other. So, of course, that's a theme in what you're talking about, and I think that's outstanding. And that's definitely something I feel has kind of gotten lost in the shuffle here lately. with people is that you have to understand that you're not going to be handed something. There has to be an element of you putting out effort as well, and then building those relationships with others. So,
Yeah. Well,
one of the
and then
things,
just to build on that second through line of work, right? So relationships, that was number one. And then number two, I don't know what's happening with Riverside and Zoom are both. Did you see those balloons?
I did. You know what it is? You just made a really good point, and the balloons came up to let us know you did it.
Look at me. Look at me. I'm so proud of myself. No, it's happened on Zoom too, where it's like super weird where I don't know what the algorithms are doing, but it's all good.
Perfect.
So that's
I like it.
is work, right? So every successful entrepreneur or creative that I've spoken to on the podcast, they did the work that was right in front of them at the time. So they were not obsessed with the work they were going to be able to do. They were obsessed with the work that was right in front of them. What's the opportunity that's right in front of me right now that I can do? What's a task that I can knock out? What is an element of the type of work that I eventually want to do? What can I chip away at right now? And it's really emerged as a beautiful through line. And it's this it's become fairly binary for me. If I start to talk to folks who are obsessed with the far future, I realize that we're actually not going to have that successful of a conversation, probably not that successful of a relationship. I've now found myself gravitating towards people that are obsessed with the thing that's right in front of them and understanding that out of the path that you create as you do the work that's right in front of you will emerge those opportunities that either A, that you were seeking and that goal that you set for yourself was correct, or B, it might be something entirely different that reveals itself to you as you work, and not in a woo way. This isn't like a Tony Robbins walk across coals. It's more of just like it emerges because it is an emergent property of the process that you are executing by doing the work that's right in front of you.
Right. See work, do work. It's one of those things my dad used to say to me all the time: stop putting the cart before the horse. Take care of what's in front of you, and everything else will kind of fall in lockstep. That's exactly right. Yeah. And so obviously these are things that are going to lead to success. It should lead to success. But where are those learning points where you say, okay, this isn't really working? And what are some of the things you've learned through these conversations that maybe people turn something around and from where it was heading down maybe a path towards failure and turning it into something better?
That's a good question. So for me, it's like less about failure and more about just feedback that you get along the way of like things that you can tighten up. Like I've really gotten to a spot in my professional life and frankly, it's translating into my personal life too. You and I were talking offline before we started about some child, kind of behavior issues that I'm experiencing as a parent right now. And it's become less about evaluating failure from like a quality control standpoint and more about managing that work as you go and looking for the feedback that you get kind of subconsciously from yourself, kind of subconsciously and relationally from other people that you're working with and just iterating on a better way. So I'll give you the most tangible example is that for me, I struggled to get this podcast started because I had that classic capital R resistance for those that read Stephen Pressfield and live the war of art lifestyle. I did my first episode with a Navy SEAL who's a family friend, and we talked about, the family business that he worked for my dad. And so we talked about subject matter that I was comfortable talking about because I've talked about it my whole life. 9 weeks later, I recorded the second episode with somebody else who was a friend. 6 weeks later, I recorded the third episode. And I was finding myself on this cadence of like, man, I'm just like really building every episode on a pedestal. And I know what I need to do is just chunk the work out and do it. But I was nervous and I was scared and I was experiencing resistance. And so I ultimately I was overwhelmed too by the amount of work that's required to do this by yourself. And I had a full-time job and all that stuff. Right? And so what I did was I engaged with somebody who was going to edit all of my stuff. So all I had to do was record the episodes and I would edit it and her team would edit it rather. And they would kind of put everything together for me and I would creative direct them a little bit. And that really helped me get the podcast going. But about 3 to 6 months into it, I realized, all right, now I'm going. I'm spending X dollars with these folks. I've now figured out and observed as they're building this cadence how I could do this myself or with a little bit less help. So I I thanked her for helping me, and she totally understood. And I folded that work into somebody else's, somebody else that I had doing some like different motion graphics and editing type work for me already. I was like, let me fold this into your responsibilities, give you a little extra cash, but save cash where I was working with this other firm. And he agreed to it, and she agreed to it. And I was very grateful for everything she did for me. And I was able to then iterate, and I was able to do more work myself and learn more about my own brand and my own product as I was building it, while still outsourcing some of it, but not outsourcing all of it. And what I was able to do is look back on my past self who had hired that person. I was like, I didn't judge that person for being overwhelmed. I just looked at that person. I said, all right, Carey, you did all that stuff. You needed that help. You got that help. Now you're pivoting and moving forward and iterating and optimizing yourself with a smaller team. Boom, 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 boom. So I didn't look at that as like failure to get the podcast started. I didn't look at it as failure to accomplish the tasks that I had in front of me. I just looked at it as iteration and optimization on things that were already in place. Does that answer your question?
Totally. Because what I'm hearing is that you're learning throughout the process the whole time. And the proof of your work and the proof of learning is that you are scaling down, you're optimizing what you're doing, like you said, and you're getting better at what you're doing. And so that's the whole point. You weren't, like you said, I don't like using the word failure. There's synonyms for it, but learning the whole time, that's what you're doing. I guess really it is only a failure if you don't learn from it. Right.
Yeah.
So, and I like your story of taking that and saying, hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's how I can get better, and then acting on that info. And that's the key, is acting on that learned information.
Yeah, for sure. There's always a better way. I mean, it happens all the time in my professional life outside the podcast too. I mean, it's like I'm working on a project right now where I looked back on the last couple of weeks. I'm like, man, I could have had the team working. I freelance now with different ad agencies and things. I'm like, I could have had the team working in a more efficient fashion those last 2 weeks. So actually, let me just change the way we're doing this and do it differently for the next 2 weeks. I don't look back and say, I totally screwed that up and I was totally wrong. And I'm like, oh, it's just a better way. So let's just keep it moving.
Right. And honestly, when I've had similar thoughts, is this recognizing them as small victories along the process of helping yourself get better. Yeah. So, one of the things I really want to touch on is what you think sets veterans apart in the workspace and why we are an asset really to anybody who would look to hire a veteran.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's super simple. Veterans who have served on teams and have served within hierarchies and understand roles and responsibilities better than a college kid who's 22 who hasn't really done that maybe since they played a college sport or a high school sport or something like that. But we've all worked in high stakes environments, regardless of your AFSC or MOS or your rating. You've worked in a high stakes environment within a hierarchy. You understand roles and responsibilities, and you're able to pivot and optimize. Jocko calls it, it's called decentralized command, and he's talked a lot about that. And he's absolutely right. This notion that military veterans are going to come into an organization and be too rigid and too hierarchical is just not the case. Like we come into organizations with the ability to operate at the level that we are comfortable operating at. And we also, what sets us apart is our ability to communicate up the chain of command in a way that corporate types maybe aren't. I work in ad agencies. And so, I always use the joke of like, and this happened when I was waiting tables and tending bar out of college too. People would be like, oh my gosh, this lady's freaking out because she doesn't have her Diet Coke. I'm like, well, two things. One, we're not, there aren't mortars raining down on us. We're not getting shot at. So let's just take a beat here and remember that this woman will get her Diet Coke and it'll be totally fine. And then the second piece being, if she's upset, I'm happy to go talk to her because she's just a human. When I was loading bombs at Lakenheath in England, we were the wing and the fighter squadron that all the chiefs and all the AGs and all the 2 stars, 3 stars, 4 stars would come and observe us, and dog and pony shows out the wazoo. And I'm sure you did the same thing, in the squadrons that you work in. It's like dog and pony shows in the military. That's just life, man. Like those people they're just people. They got stars and chevrons on their chest and on their sleeves, but at the end of the day, they're just humans. So let's speak to them like they're humans. Same thing in ad agencies. Like, oh my gosh, the CEO is going to be on the call. Great. What an opportunity to speak with another human being. who has a range of experiences just like I do. And so I'm able to, we as military service members and veterans are able to communicate up the chain of command in a way I think that others might not. And we can come into organizations and actually display and model for other people that, hey, those people that outrank you, they're just humans, and you can communicate them respectfully, obviously, but you can just communicate with them.
I love that. There really is an element of calm in a lot of the veterans that I know when it comes to situations that maybe people who haven't served tend to elevate and making mountain or molehills into mountains, basically. And we're really good at not doing that. So
Exactly. Yeah.
Last question I have for you is, what is some sage advice that you would give somebody looking to get out of the military and start something on their own?
I would go back to those two things that you and I talked about, those two through lines that have emerged from the podcast. That's build relationships and do the work that's right in front of you. Build relationships with other humans and know that it is a human to human, heart to heart, mind to mind endeavor. You're not building a network of connections that you can engage when you need to. You're building a set of relationships with human beings, and you're going on this personal and professional journey together. Number one. And then number two, do the work that's right in front of you. What can you accomplish right now that gets you just a little bit closer to what you think your goal might be? As you do that work and those things pile up, a system will emerge, and trust the system that emerges to get you closer to where it is that you want to be. And I guess I would add a third one, which is don't put your goals on a pedestal. Don't worry if you're not achieving the thing you think you want to achieve, because your future self that's going to be more successful than your current self doesn't have the same goal, and that's okay. Bridge that gap with relationships and work.
Love it. It makes me think of a line I got from one of the TIs I had at basic training where, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And putting your goals on a pedestal and really anything in life on a pedestal is kind of seeing something as a whole and getting intimidated by it. And you can't be. You have to do the work in front of you, like you said, and you'll get to there eventually. So, but
yeah, man,
well
I can't
said, man.
All the time, like, and the thing, there's another kind of a cliched phrase that gets said a lot, but it's true. It's and of course it just left my brain, but the idea is that, like, I find myself getting overwhelmed. The phrase is it doesn't get easier, you get better. I still find myself getting overwhelmed all the time, but I just know that when I get overwhelmed, it gives me an opportunity to make myself and the situation just a little bit smaller. I just get a little bit closer to the thing that's right in front of me. If I'm overwhelmed, I just revert back to what's right in front of me that I can do right now.
Yeah, controlling what you can control. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, man. Well said, dude. And thank you so much for coming on with us and sharing with everybody the lessons learned, how to be better, all of that. This super important information. And honestly, you're kind of that target audience that we're looking for here to reach veterans and kind of give them that confidence to go out there and work their way through, learn their way through, and get to the point where they can say, this is where I want to be. So, Carey, thank you again so much for coming on with us. And we'll look forward to talking to another guest on another Transition Tuesday podcast next week.
Thank you, Brandon.
Absolutely.